Yeah, so I want to talk about. Okay, I'm gonna talk about the amazing things that we can do studying young stars with disk in the time domain. So the topic of this talk is priming sequence stars with protoplanetary disks or class U objects, which are disks which are surrounded by a protoplanetary disk, which typically dissolve in about 5–10 million of years, and eventually they may evolve in planetary systems, which is one of the reasons why we are so interested in this, in the evolution of this kind of structures. Now, one of the important things is the fact that the inner region of protoplanetary disks, which means less than few 0.1 astronomical units from the star, the central star, is a very important region for different reasons. For instance, the magnetic coupling between disk and star, the accretion of mass from the disk to the star, the evolution of the angular momentum of the entire system. The problem is that with the instruments that we have today, there is no way to directly observe the inner region of protoplanetary disks. For instance, this is a wonderful image, one of the wonderful images that ALMA is producing of stars with protoplanetary disks, in which you can see wonderful and interesting structures and interesting morphology, but the inner region is somewhere here, very buried in the emission, and there is no way to resolve it. So apparently it's very difficult to study this region of the disks, but we know that prime and sequence stars are variable sources. And actually the variability, the strong variability, was one of the properties which has been defined by Joy in 1945 to define this new class of stars called T Tauri stars. For instance, in these very recent light curves with a wonderful time resolution, you can see that how this prime and sequence star is varying during the time. Now, what is the source of this variability? Like stars without disk, the stars may vary because of rotational modulation of, due to the dark spot in the photosphere, of the magnetic activity, like flares, for instance. But there is also, there are other phenomena, for instance, variable extinction, because there is a circumstellar material which can orbit around the star very nearby to the star. And this material can obscure the star during the rotation, producing variable extinction. There is also unsteady accretion. Disk accrete material, accrete gas onto the star, and this accretion can be steady with accretion funnels which can survive for a long time, producing hot spots in the surface of the star, or can be unsteady with blob of material which is taken from the disk by the magnetic field and accreted to the central star. And this can be a variable phenomenon. Now, all these phenomena are a wonderful probe to study the morphology and the properties of the inner part of the protoplanetary disks. Now, this was one of the main motivations of the coordinated synoptic investigation of 2264, which is a unique and unprecedented cooperative project in which 15 different telescopes observed the young cluster 2264 simultaneously to the observation of Corot. Corot is a satellite made for the search of exoplanets, so it provided wonderful light curves with an amazing time resolution of 30 and 500 seconds. Now, in the rest of the talk, I'm going to show you what I think are the main results of this project, hoping that this will show how powerful is the analysis in the time domain of protoplanetary disks. For instance, just by looking at the light curves you can have, just by looking at the shape of the light curves, you're already able to understand what are the main phenomena occurring very close to the star, and made a preliminary classification of these young stars with disks. This is something that has been done by Cody in 2014, who classified all the light curves observed with Corot in different classes. For instance, these are two deeper stars, in which in the light curve, whose light curve is dominated by dips, which can be very deep, and they can be also periodic or aperiodic, telling you that in this case the obscuration is due to some material that may be very close to the gravitation radius, which is obscuring the stars in a periodic way. Or sometimes the situation can be very messy, with warps in the disk and material all around the star, which can produce obscurations event aperiodically. You can have bursts in which the light curve is dominated by these very narrow but bright bursts, which are due to accretion. And these are not stable accretion, because the stable accretion will produce a light curve like this. These are unstable accretion. So again, by looking at the light curves, you're able to understand which is the main phenomena, the main characteristic of accretion. These are kind of light curves, quasi-periodic light curves, are due to this stable accretion, producing stable hotspots in the photosphere, which are modulated by the rotation of the star. Sometimes there are very bad guys, these stochastic light curves in which all these phenomena occur simultaneously, and there is no way to classify them, and they vary in a very weird way. Or sometimes you have very nice guys in which the variation is very periodic, and this kind of variation is due to modulation, rotational modulation of a dark spot in the photosphere, exactly like stars without this. So just by looking at the light curves that we can produce, we are already able to classify and to understand what is the main phenomenon occurring around stars with this. But we can do more. For instance, we can try to model the system in order to reproduce the light curve that we are observing. This is something that has been done, for instance, by McGuinness in 2015, in which they observed the stars, dippers, in which the dip observed in the optical were anti-correlated with the dips observed in infrared. So while the star was fading in the optical, it was brightening in infrared. They tried different models, and the model that actually was able to reproduce this kind of variability was this one. These are young stars with a protoplanetary disk. We are observing the star in this direction. The disk has warps, and is accreting. So we also have hot spots in the surface of the star. And when the warp is obscuring the star, producing an optical dip, this warp here is illuminated by the hot spot, processing the light in infrared, so producing a brightening in infrared. There is no way to actually try to test models like this except by studying the star in the time domain. We can do more. We can try to understand the composition of the obscuring material. For instance, if we have a dipper which is observed simultaneously in optical and X-ray, we can try to extract the X-ray spectrum during the optical dips. You obtain the optical extinction from the optical light curve, and you can obtain NH from the X-ray spectrum extracted during the optical dip. In this case, for instance, you can see that NH is increasing during the optical dip. You can calculate the duration, H over AV, and this will help you to discriminate between dust-rich obscuring material belonging to the disk of gas-rich obscuring material belonging to the accretion streams. For instance, you can also compare the size of the dips in the light curve with the rotational period of the star. And again, this helps you discriminate if the obscuring material is part of the disk or part of the accretion stream. Well, these are burster. As I told you before, this is one light curve which is dominated by aperiodic stochastic accretion. And also you can combine the optical light curves with spectroscopy in order to understand how the accretion rate is related to the variability that you're observing in optical. This is something that has been done by Sala in 2016. And for instance, they understood that different classes of variability are connected with different intensity of the accretion. This is the accretion rate, this is the accretion rate from the H alpha, and the different symbols and colors encode different kind of optical variability. Bursters are those that are accreting more, dippers are those accreting in an intermediate way, and stars with periodic variability is those accreting less. So you have a lot of information on what's going on in the inner part of the system. They tried to understand how all the signature of accretion were varying during the optical variability of the star, but unfortunately there were just a few stars in which this kind of study was possible to do. Another thing that you can do, for instance, again, if you have a star burster which is observed simultaneously in optical and X-rays, during the optical burst, you can extract the X-ray spectrum and try to observe soft X-ray emission. The soft X-ray emission is related to the gas which is accreting from the disk to the star and allows you to estimate the pre-shock temperature of the accreting material, which allows you to estimate the post-shock, the pre-shock velocity, which allows you to estimate the launching radius of the accretion funnel. And you can try to obtain a picture of the magnetosphere around the star. So these are the conclusions. In the time domain, we can do amazing things in the studying stars with protoplanetary disks. This is something that we have done in 2264 with this project, but this is just one cluster with one age and one given environment. So this project, even if it was an amazing project, do not provide any clue of variability can tell us about the evolution of stars with disk, on how this evolution can change in different environments. So we need an observation across most of the galactic plane in order to understand this. And besides, the deep multicolor photometry that LSST will produce will tell us a lot about the extinction variability in these sources. And if you have questions, I'm here to answer.